Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at Space Cowboy Books Online. Today, we have a very special treat. We have Sandy Enriquez and Andrew Lippert visiting from the Eaton Science Fiction Library, which is, I got to take a tour of a few weeks ago. It was one of the most amazing collections of science fiction that I've ever seen. The Eaton collection of science fiction and fantasy is one of the world's largest, richest, and deepest collections of science fiction, fantasy, horror, utopian literature, and related genres. The collection originated with the personal library of Dr. J. Lloyd Eaton, consisting of about 7,500 hardback editions of science fiction, fantasy, and horror from the 19th to the mid-20th centuries, which was acquired by the UCR Library in 1969. As the collection has grown, it has become a major resource for research in all aspects of speculative fiction and is visited by scholars from all around the world. So, if you could, please both introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your jobs and how you support the Eaton collection of sci-fi and fantasy at UCR Special Collections and University Archives. And while they're doing that, I'm going to drop a link in the chat to where y'all can find out a little bit more about this amazing collection.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, John Paul. And hi, everyone. My name is Sandy, and I'm probably have the longest title at the whole UCR campus, but my title is Special Collections, Public Services, Outreach, and Community Engagement Librarian. So I'm a librarian here in Special Collections and Archives, and my role with the Eaton is really focusing on outreach, on public services, so helping folks learn about the collection, how to access the collection, just making it more visible and trying to set up workshops and attend events like this so that we stay connected to the community. And I'll pass it on to Andrew to introduce himself.
Thank you, Sandy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Andrew. I am the Special Collections Processing Archivist. Not an officially affiliated Eaton title, but in the last few years, I've been filling in quite a bit along with Sandy. The two of us have been doing a lot of work with the Eaton collection, just trying to keep the ball rolling and all that kind of stuff. We may get into this a little bit later, but normally the JK Klein librarian is the one who handles the primary curatorial responsibilities for the collection, but that position has been open for a little while. And so we've been doing our best to fill in, but my normal duties involve working with manuscript collections and the archival materials and processing collections, preparing finding aids, and really making collections accessible and usable by researchers. And so that involves, hands-on work with the collections, but also a lot of work with researchers doing reference activities and that kind of thing. So, but we've been, we've had a lot of time to get to know the Eaton collection, and we're happy to share some of that knowledge with you all today.
So how did the Eaton collection come about? And more generally, what did this mean for science fiction studies in academia? Because as not everyone may know, that is a fairly new field for the academic world.
Yeah, for sure. So you touched on a little bit of that in your opening, which is great. And I'll reiterate some of that. So Dr. J. Lloyd Eaton, he was a physician up in the Oakland area, and he passed away in 1968. And then his collection was acquired by the library in 69. Yeah, you mentioned it was about 7,500 volumes. It's much bigger now, quite a lot bigger. Jean-Paul, you got to see how much bigger it is now, but yeah, it's several 100,000 items now, plus the archival collections too. And so the materials came to the library. The university librarian at the time was a science fiction fan himself, and so saw it as sort of a unique opportunity, and there weren't a lot of places collecting this type of material. In fact, this may have been the first academic institution to collect science fiction materials. It's always hard to say who truly was the first to do something, but UCR was right there at the beginning. And then, so about 10 years later, in 1979, George Slusser was hired as a professor in the comp lit department. And that sort of started the Eaton becoming what it eventually became. So he was a professor in comp lit. He had an interest in science fiction. He was told that there was this collection of science fiction books in the basement of the library, and he came to check it out and He thought it was interesting, and he saw science fiction and speculative fiction generally as, an area that was rich for academic inquiry, and that's it's something that people weren't really doing. And so he took on the curatorial position. He was the first curator for the Eaton collection. And that was something he did in addition to his normal academic work. It wasn't, at least early on, and certainly I don't think it was a paid position. He just did it for his own interest and love. He started the Eaton Conference, and he really had this mission or goal of turning science fiction studies into this intellectual academic, field of pursuit. And I think he wasn't alone by any stretch of the imagination. It was him, James Gunn over at Kansas, Darko Suvin in Europe, Chip Delaney back east. There were a handful of people who were really pretty active in the late 60s and early 70s, trying to do this. And there were some within the fan community too. Like I know Forey Ackerman, he did a little bit of lecturing in the 50s with some undergraduate courses, I believe, at various places. So there were people trying to do this, and that's sort of how all this got started. And Slusser, he just sought to build the collection. He was the one who brought in a lot of our big pulp editions. He bought huge chunks of paperbacks in really good condition. So he was really the one who oversaw the largest portion of growth for the collection.
And beyond science fiction, the Special Collections Library also specializes in comic books. Can you tell us about this aspect of the collection and its aims, as well as how this has changed over the years?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something that both Andrew and I were really interested in researching more, because as far as changes goes, one of the major changes to the comic collect part of the collection is that we started acquiring more manga, more Japanese style comics recently. And so we tried to figure out, when did the comics first become a part of the Eaton? And unfortunately, we weren't able to find an exact date or anything, but in talking to other colleagues who have been at the library much longer than us, it looks like there were comics already cataloged as part of the Eaton collection, even in the mid 1980s. So it's definitely been an established part of the collection over time. It's a really vast part of the collection. There's thousands of comics in there, a lot of older stuff. And we do get a lot of folks trying to donate more comics, but we really need to avoid getting duplicates of issues that we may already have, since space is unfortunately limited. So it's something that we're a little bit more particular about nowadays in terms of what we want to acquire. But in terms of the manga, because that's been the biggest shift in our comic collecting area, that's really been brought on by another big accession, which is the Fred Patton collection. So if folks are familiar with Fred Patton, he was a really amazing, anime and manga kind of historian and just kind of researcher. He was responsible for bringing a lot of the early anime to the U.S., for getting translations and rights. So his collection was a huge, resource and benefit for the Eaton, and that brought with it a lot of manga that we hadn't had before. And in addition, we also had some new manga purchases as part of a diversity initiative. So we wanted to diversify parts of the collection and collect more LGBTQ plus materials. And so we have a lot of manga that kind of emerged from that initiative a few years back.
Is it unusual for a university library to have a collection of comics?
I would say that it's a little bit of an emerging trend. There are other universities that now are collecting comics, so it's something that is becoming more widely known, the same way science fiction is. But it's definitely a newer thing.
Tell us a bit about the collection's focus on fan materials and how this is unique in a library setting, and it's certainly unique to science fiction, the importance of fandom and the strength of that. So how is that unique in a library setting, and what are some of the treasures and aims of the fan collection of the Eaton?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually want to just jump back just real briefly to the previous one and just mention one really big comics collection. I know like Dark Horse Comics, they donated a massive collection of their production to Portland State, actually. I believe the guys who run Dark Horse are either live there or from there, or maybe went to Portland State. There's a connection with Portland and Portland State. But yeah, I know they have a massive collection of basically the entire output of Dark Horse comics up there at Portland State. So if anybody's interested in that kind of thing, Portland's a good place to go check out. But onto the fandom aspect and the fan materials, I think in a lot of ways it starts with Eaton as a fan. You know, you have to be a fan to collect this stuff in the first place, I think. And you know, some of the materials from his papers, you know, we've got handwritten lists of, you know, whether they're short stories or novels or what have you that were coming out of, it was pulp mags or whatever. You know, they're handwritten notes from Eaton, and he was giving ratings, you know, to different stories or different authors or different books. And you know, it's like depending on how many you know, he did like pluses. He didn't do like stars or whatnot. But you know, it's like if I got 2 or more pluses, then it was something worth collecting. If it only got 1 plus, he didn't deem it really worth adding to his or anybody's collection. You know, so it's that kind of fun stuff that you get. And so there's roots in fandom, you know, with the origins of the collection, and with Eaton himself. And I think in a lot of ways, I don't think you have science fiction and fantasy the way we know it without fandom, right? I think that the field and fandom are interrelated and complementary to each other. So, and it's really it's the published works, it's the author's papers, and it's the fandom materials. If we're talking about the archives here in the Eaton collection, all 3 of those work together, right, to tell bigger stories. And so you need all pieces of it. But I would say that there is a little bit of a difference. Fandom materials can pose a little bit of a challenge for an archives, because a lot of fandom related material is objects, right? It's things, it's material culture. And so archives excel when you're talking about, you know, paper and books. That's always been the real strength of archives. And when you get into that objects realm, you're sort of edging into the museum space. And you know, archives and museums have distinct methodologies, distinct tools, distinct, you know, software and whatnot, that's in infrastructure that supports the work that you do. And so the object aspect of fandom can pose a little, it can be a little tricky sometimes, but that's not to say that we don't want it. Of course, it's part of the game here. But it's one of those things that it forces us to sort of get out of our comfort zone a little bit and think outside the box sometimes in terms of, you know, how we approach the material or how we do our job specifically.
Is it sometimes difficult to make the call of something that belongs in an archive versus a museum?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of times, I mean, so Sandy and I are relatively new. We've only been here a handful of years each. So we're dealing with decisions that were made decades before us a lot of times, right? So it's, you know, it's here, it's what we have to, it's just part of the collection. But it is something we think about, you know, when we look at future donations. You know, it's like, how because it really comes down to, a lot of times you want to take care of this stuff properly, right? And so we don't want to take something in that doesn't make sense for us, that can't be stored properly, or that we don't have the conservational, you know, tools or expertise to work with, right? Like, so you want to make sure that first and foremost, the material is in an appropriate institution with the right resources and the skills and the, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that is always something that you think about when you're talking, you know, when you're looking at donations and potential additions to the collections. Yeah.
So aside from being a wonderful resource for the students at UCR, the Eaton is also open to the public. How and what are some of the ways that the public can utilize the collection?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think is very exciting about all of our collections, actually. Everything is open to the public, so anyone can come. You don't have to be a researcher, you don't have to be university affiliated. And so we just really want to emphasize that point because a lot of times people are intimidated to come to this space or they just don't know it's here. They think that maybe it's like a long process if they have to do like an interview or do an appointment. We actually take all walk-ins. So you don't even need to set up an appointment. What we recommend you do is just go to our website. You can create a free account on there and you can start requesting which materials you would like to see. So we'll talk a little bit more later about what the resources are to research our collections and see what exactly it is that you're interested in viewing. But once you have an idea of what you want to see, you just submit that all digitally, and then you can come in person and we will teach you how to manage or how to handle the materials. So there are some things here that are a little more fragile than what you might see at other, libraries, but we will make sure that you have all the skills that you need to be able to go through the materials and do the research. Or if you just want to peruse materials, you also can do that. You don't have to have like an active research project or anything. You are welcome to come and view the materials anytime that we're open. And the other thing to mention, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but we are closed stacks. So that's what differentiates us from the rest of the library, meaning that you can't check out any materials. Unfortunately, all things must be viewed directly in our reading room, and that's to preserve the security of the items and, if they're fragile, to make sure that they're not exposed to other elements that might damage them.
For anyone anywhere near Riverside, I highly recommend, if you're a science fiction and fantasy fan or just a book lover in general, to peruse what's there, because it's kind of overwhelmingly amazing. So in regards to researchers though, and the resource for researchers, what are some of the types of research projects that have been conducted at the Eaton?
Yeah, this is a really fun one, and there's a pretty long history here. But I guess the first thing I'd want to touch on is like the cyclical nature that research has, or the trends within fields, and the way certain things, certain subject areas or time periods or frameworks, or right, there's all these different aspects that go into research that come in and out of vogue, and so the research is sort of constantly changing, and the archives are always trying to catch up. We're always behind whatever the bleeding edge of academic inquiry is. But it's one of those fun things that keeps you on your toes when somebody comes in with a question. You're like, wow, that's a really totally out of left field question that we hadn't even thought of before. But I will say that, right, the collection's been around for quite a long time. And Slusser was a professor here, and he had graduate students and whatnot. So there's quite a long history of that kind of work here. I will say more recently, actually just a couple of weeks ago, we had somebody who's towards the end of their PhD work in the Science Fiction and Cultures of Science program, the SFCS program here, which does give a PhD in science fiction. Well, it's a PhD. It's not in science fiction studies. That's not what they call it. But he's doing some work on furry fandom, and been using the George Patton or the Fred Patton collection quite a bit. And so that's an example of some recent research. There was also an initiative by some grad students in that program. The Eaton Journal is something that they put together that ran for several years while they were here. So most of the people who were working on that have since graduated and moved on, but that was a grad student run academic journal that was, to promote the use of primary sources and archival research. And so a lot of those students used the Eaton collection quite a bit. I will say I did see Leslie Kay in attendance, and I believe that she used some of the Eaton materials a while back now at this point on her dissertation. Perhaps she would care to share some of that in the chat if she is so willing. And we do have some exhibit collaboration that's been going on. Some of this is still like very early stages. We're looking at 2024 or 25, in terms of when these exhibits would happen. But so I'm not gonna name any names, but I will say that topically, one of them, the curators for that were looking at sort of the history and future of human development or human advancement. So they were looking, backwards at sort of your Conan, the barbarian type stuff, the sword and sorcery or sword and sandal type adventure story portrayals, and then also looking forward towards like cybernetics and androids and robots and that kind of thing. And then there was another institution that's looking at sort of sexuality, sexual identity, and how those interact or intersect with science fiction, how they've been portrayed in the past, future envisionings of it, that kind of stuff. So, there's quite a range, in terms of the research that's being done with the Eaton collection.
Is there any current student initiative to get the journal going again?
That is a question for the grad students and the professors who would be supervising that work, or assisting in that work, advising in that work over in the SFCS program. Yeah, I'm not involved with that conversation, but I have no idea if folks are interested in doing that at this point. Yeah.
But the students could do it if they wanted to, right?
They could if they wanted to, yes.
And beyond books and memorabilia, the Eaton features the papers of many science fiction authors and fan writers. Can you tell us a bit about this part of the collection and how the library goes about acquiring these kind of materials?
Yes. This is a really big question. So we're just going to touch on a couple aspects of it here, but yeah, so for perspective, within the Eaton collection, I'm just checking my notes here to make sure I get the numbers right. We have 88 what we call manuscript collections. So the Eaton collection is right. It's the comic books that we've talked about. It's the print materials, like the pulps or the books themselves. And then there's all of the archival material, which includes authors' papers, fandom collections. We have artists' collections. It's the other stuff, the non-print material for the most part. So we have 88 collections totaling about 1,700, maybe 1,800 linear feet. That's a lot. It's hard to put it in context if you're not familiar with, how much space stuff takes in the libraries, but it's several ranges, hundreds and hundreds of boxes. And so in that subset, we have about 38 collections, give or take one or two, depending on whether you want to include editors' papers. Some editors were authors, some weren't. But anyway, yeah, so we have a pretty extensive, subset of authors' papers, people like Greg Benford, Anne McCaffrey, Poole Anderson, some of the bigger collections. We have some smaller collections from like William Hope Hodgson or Jody Scott, Jamie Go, who was somebody who graduated here. She's an alumnus of UCR and was part of the one of the Clarion workshops, and she donated some of her authorial papers. So that's just sort of a rough snapshot. And in terms of how we go about adding to that material, it can go a lot of different directions. Some of it is people, we approach, and some of it, people just come to us out of the blue. Sometimes people are passed to us by, professors on campus. So we've had a few editions that have come through somebody who reaches out to the head of the SFCS program, and she very kindly says, I'm not the right person for this, and she passes it along, and then we have a conversation. And every one of these donations is unique, because each of the people is unique and each of the collections is unique. So the conversations are different every time. There's some common elements to it, but yeah, it's sort of, I don't know. I think you have some other questions that we might get into a bit more of those details down the road, but yeah, I hope that gets to some of that.
And for researchers and members of the public that want to visit, the author's papers collection is impressive and amazing. Stanley Weinbaum, I mean, it kind of goes on and on with the neat stuff that's there.
I will say, just to jump in real quick, for people who want to look specifically at the author's stuff, you can look at the Online Archive of California under UC Riverside. But if you go through, there's a little bit of website navigating, but we have research guides that are linked on the Special Collections website. And there is one specifically for the author's papers. So it's basically just a list of all the author's collections that we have. I did say we have, I included some of the editors in that research guide too. So like Gardner Jeswa is on that list, although he was an author as well. But we can pick nits later.
Imagine there's a lot of overlap in general.
There is. It's hard to put people in boxes.
So how does a science fiction or fantasy author go about donating their materials to the collection, and what does the process look like for papers to become a part of the collection?
Yeah. So I was looking ahead a little bit, perhaps cheating a bit, but so yeah, I mentioned sometimes it's we get approached and sometimes we will pursue a collection. So either way, right, you have some sort of initial contact, and this is just the really high level flyby. But right, you have that initial contact. Sometimes it's like a cold call to somebody. Sometimes it's somebody who's been sent to you. So we will try to get in touch. We will have, a conversation, try to figure out, what's in their collection. What kind of stuff do they have? What are we looking for? We'll have conversations about copyrights. It is possible for people to grant copyright, to pass their copyright on to the institution, to the university. We'll talk about any privacy concerns that they have. I will go through, since I'm usually the one who, these last couple of years, I've been doing most of the donor work, and I'm also the one who does the processing of the collections. So I'm the one who can sort of go through that process with them. It's sort of easy when it's all lumped into one person these days right now, but a lot of times it would be, you'd have more conversations with more people within the department. But, just talk about what does processing a collection look like. Give them examples of finding aids. We'd send them some resources of like, here's sort of the same way that we do, in the chat in events like this. Here's some of the things so you can take a look at, what this looks like on the at the end. And so that's sort of where it starts. There's some paperwork involved, deeds of gifts. Then there's a physical transfer of materials, and then once it's here, somebody like me goes through it, reboxes it. A lot of times, most people have stuff in boxes that have been in their garage for however many years. And so you want to put them in fresh boxes and archival quality boxes and all that kind of stuff. And, we'll go through and try to do some initial pass-throughs of, more proper housing and that kind of stuff. And then goes on the shelf. And at some point it gets processed and finding aids get written. So that's sort of the rough outline for you. Like I said, it's unique to each person because each person is unique and each collection is unique and each person's path through the industry is unique. So there's a lot of it's best to stay flexible as you have all these conversations.
It must keep the job quite exciting that it's not the same thing happening over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. And it is, I will say, if there are any people in the audience that are at all interested in this kind of stuff, some of the things that we try to keep in mind when we're pursuing collections, and the things we'll consider when somebody approaches us is you sort of, what makes a collection unique, or what makes, we want the materials that demonstrate what makes a person as a creator, as an author, as a producer of things, what makes them unique? What's their thought process? What's their creative process? How do they navigate all of these different aspects? Or, sometimes it's, what did they do in addition to their writing, right? Were they involved in, various organizations or other activities affiliated with the field? What kind of relationships they have in the field? Like, this kind of stuff, just, we because that's what is the feedback that we always get that's most interesting to researchers is wanting to be able to follow somebody's creative process, or, you know, for younger people in the field to be able to come in and see those rejection letters, or to see how hard it was in the beginning to get started as a writer, like that kind of stuff that really documents, you know, not just the successes, but the reality of, you know, what it means to be an author, you know, what it means to try and make a living at doing this, you know, that kind of thing.
And then it looks like Sandy has shared in the chat here with the question we had, but we have a question from the audience from Kurt. And Kurt, check out the chat because there's been some links provided here. But Kurt would like to know a little bit more about the fanzine collection at the Eaton and how comprehensive it is.
I'm not sure there will ever be a comprehensive collection of fanzines anywhere, ever. If anybody knows anything about fanzines, they get made very quickly. They're all over the place. Anybody can make one. So yeah, I'm not sure comprehensive is the right word to use when you're talking about fanzines, but we do have a very large fanzine collection. And I know there are several other sister institutions that have very large fanzine collections. So large enough that you can get a pretty good snapshot covering the lifetime, I guess, of fanzines, which, you know, go back to the 30s, the mid 30s, I think, maybe the early 30s. And with the dawn of the internet, you know, fanzines start to die off. And, you know, at this point, I'm not sure people are doing a lot of fanzines. There are still some of the long running fanzines. I know like APA-L is still live and kicking. And they've been doing it for a very long time at this point. I think they've got a couple thousand, maybe almost 3,000 issues at this point. Yeah, there's enough that covers, you know, a good 50 to 70 years of fanzines here that you can, we can't guarantee that you're going to find the fanzine you're looking for, but you'll find a really good representation of the whole fanzine, you know, period.
And I'll just add that the fanzines are also cataloged. So if you look at the UCR library, you know, catalog website online, you can search by name, so, or the maker. So if you have some details of what you want to see, that makes it a little easier to find it. But otherwise, it is quite big, so it's a little hard to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, I'll also jump back in and say FANAC has done a lot of digitization of fanzines. If you're familiar with that, FANAC, FANAC.org. So that's a pretty easy place to go to just poke around and see what's up.
There is certainly enough material to do a super deep dive into fandom.
For sure.
So when I was on the tour with you and I was kind of grilling you guys with questions about how all the behind the scenes work, you told me about the Consortium of Science Fiction Librarians. And I mean, what a cool name in general, but I wondered if you could elaborate and tell our audience a little bit more about the consortium.
Yeah, this is a really great group. And I just mentioned sister institutions. So yeah, this was, I think I saw Elspeth in attendance. I was just emailing Elspeth and another member of the group trying to get a little bit of that information from the early days of this, because I wasn't around for that. But yeah, so it started out towards in late 2011, and it was just an informal group of people from institutions that had science fiction and fantasy collections. And it was really, initially it was aimed at facilitating communication, a place where people could exchange ideas. And there was, you know, a hope or an idea that there might be, you know, collaborative work that could be done, whether that was grants or projects or whatever. And in the last couple of years, it's really taken off a lot, I think in large part because of the pandemic and, you know, everybody working from home. And it was pretty nice outlet to be able to engage with colleagues, even if virtually. But to date, right now, we have almost 30 members. people that are contributing. That's not 30 institutions. I don't know the actual count on the number of institutions that are participating in it right now, but there are a few people, like Sandy and I are both part of it. So there's multiple people from some institutions, but yeah, it's mostly the United States. We have some folks from Canada and some folks from the UK as well, and it's just been a really great, space, for collaborative projects. We were putting together some, conference panel, proposals, and we had some plans to do a few of those, and the pandemic, we thought we were coming out of it, and then things got worse again, and so we had, this last year we'd planned to travel with a few of us from different institutions to do some conference work, but that didn't pan out. It's been a place where you can, we have an email list, so when people get reference questions, I know I've bounced ideas off of colleagues, or if I know, I had a professor here ask about something and it had to do with some fandom activity in the UK, and so I was like, I know exactly who to go talk to, and so I reached out, which I wouldn't have known that person if it hadn't been for the consortium, right? So it was it's been a great way to make connections, and it provides a really useful resource for us. And we have done some other things. I know there was an initiative that we were putting together called Mirror Talks that was first started at Texas A&M with Jeremy Brett and what was going on over there. But a few of us got together and talked about pulp magazines. We did an event, I think, I don't remember when that was. Time has lost meaning with everything that's been going on, but it was either in the spring or last fall. I can't remember, but that was a really great event, and I know that there was real interest in doing more of those. So yeah, it serves as your sort of standard collegial, collaborative, gathering space, and a place to share ideas and ask each other questions and all that.
I gather that with a collection like the Eaton, there is quite a bit of interinstitutional exchange.
There can be, yeah. We've definitely, as Sandy mentioned earlier, we're specifically with the comics, but really with a lot of things, space is at a premium. So duplication is always something that we're wary of bringing into the collections at this point. So, when we get donations and we're like, we talk to somebody who wants to donate and we're like, well, this doesn't fit here for some reason, or we have already reviewed it and we know that it's really duplicative, then that's something that this is a great, the consortium group is a really great space to pass a donor to somebody else, to another institution that might be able to make use of those materials. And, because we want to find homes for donations and collections, and we want to make sure that it fits for both the donor and the collection, right, or the institution. So yeah, it's a way to be even, collaborative in terms of collection development as well. So it's always better to be collaborative than competitive when it comes to that kind of thing.
Absolutely, in pretty much all things.
Yeah.
There is currently a position open at the Eaton Library. I wonder if you both could tell us a little bit about this position and what type of applicants that the library is looking for.
Yes. So I mentioned the JK and Doris Klein librarian position. That is the curatorial position, the primary curatorial position, is currently open, and the job is posted on the library website. There's a link there that you can go to find that with the full job description. It closes on January 21st. So there's about a month and a half still, or yeah, 7 weeks, something like that, that the job will be, the posting will be up, and then we will be reviewing candidates. But that is, it's a pretty interesting position. So we're looking for people that have a mix of librarian and archival skills. So you need to have, that dual skill set, in addition to subject knowledge, right? It's sort of, you need to have all three. It's not an easy ask, I know, but and if people have experience working with donors, if we want people that are comfortable navigating an academic setting, so right, you need to be able to interact with the community, undergraduates, graduates, professors, there's options and opportunities for people to do some instruction with that position as well, and with the Eaton collection as a whole. So it really runs a pretty wide gamut of opportunity in terms of the things you can do with the collection. But yeah, it's that that library and archival background, those two skill sets plus the subject knowledge is really key. And I will mention, we are still hammering out the details on this, but we are looking at doing a couple informational sessions. So there'll be like 30 minutes to an hour where Cherry Williams, the director of special collections, myself and Sandy will be doing, we'll just talk about UCR, we'll talk about the position a little bit. And it's a really informal opportunity to, to provide people who are interested a space to learn more about the area, the institution, the department, ask us questions. So this would be a pre-application and pre-interview process where it's just an opportunity for people to chat with us a little bit and ask questions and get to know more about the position.
And I'll just add on real quick, like I think Andrew probably mentioned it, but just to reiterate the point, because it's very true for, where we work here at UCR, but this position is intensely collaborative. So the person who does get selected for it would need to be open to being able to work with different kinds of folks across the university, not just in the library, in the community as well. And also as a team, we do a lot of collaboration amongst ourselves. And it's just because it is such a vast, responsibility, and there's so many different angles to the collection that it really benefits from having a lot of different perspectives.
And if anyone in our audience is interested in that position, Sandy has shared the link in the chat. So go there and check that out. Another question from the audience here. This one's from Jerry. And I'm going to add to this question a little bit. Is there a plan to upload more of the JK Klein photo collection? And if one of you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit for our audience that might not be familiar, what the JK Klein photo collection is.
Sure. Yeah. So JK Klein, I like to refer to him as sort of the officially unofficial photographer of science fiction fandom from, I don't know, the mid 50s through the 80s, maybe into the 90s. But yeah, he attended conferences or conventions around the country for decades, and he took thousands of photographs, thousands of panels of people milling around in the halls between sessions, to the party rooms, to like you name it. He was all over the conventions. And so yeah, there's about 60,000 images from his collection that he gave us. And there was a pilot project that was done a handful of years ago to do some digitization from that collection. And those are, I think they may have been, they're posted on CalSphere. If I think that link may have already been posted, but if you go to the CalSphere link and type Klein, Klein, it'll pop right up. So you can see what's been put up there. And there is a desire for sure, both within the community and here amongst us, to get more of those images digitized. The problem is always just the sheer scale of the collection. It's huge. I mean, there's no way to get around that. It's enormous. And it's a lot of times it's opportunity costs, right? If you do one thing, you can't do another thing. So there's always a weighing of, where our digitization projects, how that priority list gets created. We mentioned, the Eaton collection is part of special collections at University Archives. So it's not just its own thing. It's not on its own. It doesn't have its own staff, right? It's all of us working on all the other stuff and the Eaton collection, right? So it's one of four major chunks of the department. So as much as, some of us might want to just do Eaton all the time. That's just not how it works, right? There's a bunch of different spaces that we all have to work in. And so, yeah, not a great answer. There is hope and a desire, and there will be more digitization for that collection in the future. And I'd like to see personally some of the, not just the photographs, but some of his actual papers digitized as well, because there's some interesting stuff there as well. But yeah, it is in the future. I can't give you a date though. So sorry, Jerry.
Is this the sort of thing that the public could perhaps volunteer to help with?
Probably not. We'd probably be looking at probably doing bulk digitization with a vendor, if I had to wager a guess, maybe. Yeah, there's a lot of conversations that have to go on. You know, as any academic institution is somewhat bureaucratic at times. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are involved in those decisions. So there's a lot to be figured out in terms of how the mechanisms, in terms of how we would go about doing it. But I would think we'd probably lean on the community again in the future in terms of getting like the information the way it was done the first time, you know, putting the images out there and trying to get feedback on terms of, hey, that's Forey Ackerman, that's Robert Heinlein, that's Chip Delaney, right? Like, you know, people who know who were there, right? People who are in those photographs, be like, hey, that's me, and I'm standing next to this guy, and this guy, right? Like that kind of knowledge is invaluable. So we would most certainly lean on that again, I think, if, you know, when we get to it.
So many would be intimidated. I know I was perusing the collection for the first time and handling some of the more rare materials, wonderful things that are in the collection. What advice do you have for those wanting to utilize the Eaton collection for the first time and for handling these types of materials?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern that a lot of people feel. It's really common that we hear that. But I would just reiterate again that the collections are here to be used. So if folks are not coming in, then we're not doing our jobs well enough. Like we want folks to feel comfortable, to feel, prepared and confident in managing and handling materials. So I would say my best advice would just be to go slow. If sometimes this might not apply to a lot of the items in the Eaton, but there are some items that we have that when you first look at it, you're not entirely sure how it opens, or which way is what. So when you're first kind of interacting with the material, you just really want to go slow, be mindful, take your time. Don't just try to like flip through it, but just very gently kind of, approach the item and sort of see how it functions and explore it. So it's all part of the process of kind of interacting with these materials, is sort of like just having that mindset of I'm going to take my time. I'll also mention that there's always someone at the front desk. So when you're using materials here, if you have questions or if you come across something that's like confusing or maybe like I don't know, just something that's super super fragile that you're maybe not sure you want to handle, there's always someone that you can ask a question to or pull aside. It's usually a student working at the front desk, but there's always a librarian on call, so they can find us if it's something that they're not able to handle on their own. But yeah, I would just say like, us doing these sorts of interviews and outreach events is all in an effort to get more folks to come and utilize the collection.
And you both did a wonderful job of dissipating that fear, by the way. I'm going to drop some links in the chat regarding this next question here, but for those that can't visit the Eaton, what online resources are available for researchers? And I'm going to drop some links in there while they answer.
Yeah, so I've mentioned a couple of these. We sometimes speak in acronyms, but so a couple things. The Online Archive of California is a wonderful, wonderful resource, not just for us, but it really encompasses the entire state of California in terms of cultural heritage institutions. And that is where we put our finding aids. So, if you want to go get more information about what's in the Poole and Karen Anderson papers, you can go look at the finding aid that was created for that collection, and that's hosted on the Online Archive of California, or OAC, and that is run by the California Digital Library, which is part of the UC system. So that is a university. It's not affiliated with a specific campus. It's just for the system as a whole. And similarly, also hosted by that same group is Calisphere. And that is you can think of that as sort of the digital library. That is where you can go to see materials that have been digitized. So that's photographs, there's textual material that's been digitized that's on there. There are some not Eaton specific, I don't believe, but it does support like streaming audio or streaming video content as well. So any of that kind of digital content goes onto Calosphere. And the two OAC and Calosphere are connected. So if you are on one, you will be able to find links to the other. Generally only for those collections that exist on both. But yeah, but otherwise, some other really good options that are beyond, or I guess, so I mentioned our research guides. So we have some of those that can be useful, but beyond UCR specific or Eaton specific resources, the Internet Archive actually has a pretty sizable amount of pulp magazines that have been digitized there. So if you are familiar with that, that is a really great resource. It's not comprehensive, it's not all of them. I'm not even sure that they have full runs of any single title up there, but again, it's enough that you can get a really good representation of, what pulp fiction, pulp mags look like. And I mentioned FANAC as well. That's another really good resource, and there are several others. I'll just call out, there are a bunch of other institutions too, like this is calling back to one of our first early questions, the UCR and the Eaton were one of the first ones, but we're not alone anymore by any means. So just locally here, in Southern California, San Diego State and CSU Fullerton have science fiction collections as well. Up at Oregon, they have, the University of Oregon in Eugene has a number of wonderful collections. They have like Le Guin's papers and Tiptree's papers there. And I can't name everybody, but there's people in the Midwest, there's people back east. You've got Iowa, Texas A&M, I mentioned earlier, Syracuse, Northern Illinois, Kansas. It's spread across the country at this point. And I mentioned our UK colleague is at the University of Liverpool. That's one of, if not the biggest collections there. So in Europe, or certainly in the UK. So science fiction collections have spread quite a lot. And I just bring this up to say that if you're not in Southern California, if you're not close to us, you may be close to one of these other folks, one of these other institutions. So if you're looking for, if you want to know where to go, you're welcome to reach out to us, or if you reach out to any of the folks at those institutions that I mentioned, they can point you in the right direction too. Archivists and librarians tend to be pretty friendly people that want to help you find the thing you're looking for. So don't hesitate.
That's certainly been my experience. Got a great question from Kurt in the audience here. And Kurt, I'm assuming those are pulp magazines you're sitting in front of there. Can you discuss the conservation, preservation, and repair of the more fragile materials such as pulp magazines? Do you use technologies such as vapor phase deacidification?
That is a wonderful question. And I will say that we don't do vapor phase deacidification here. A lot of the pulps are, especially the older ones, in a lot of ways, they're almost so far deteriorated at this point because they were printed on such poor quality material that there's not much you can really do for them. In a lot of cases, well, there's always, if price is no object, there's always something you can do. But in most practical cases, there's not tons you can do. At some point, doing like what the Internet Archive has done and just digitizing them and having master digital scans available is sometimes the only thing that you can do at some point. We do have 2 copies of some, like if we're talking about pulps, like some of the pulp titles we have multiple runs of. So you have, some of them are like in their original bindings and they're falling apart, turning into brown powder. And some of them are in, much more rigid, we call them library bindings, and they're much more durable and they're much more handleable. And so if somebody needs to look at one, you give them the one that's in good condition and you don't subject the one that's falling apart to any more handling than absolutely necessary. So the first step in any of this is usually just trying to limit further damage or further degradation. And then certainly you could go into deacidification or other more intensive and invasive forms of preservation. But in a lot of cases with the pulps, especially when you're looking at so many of them, you're looking at huge costs in terms of those more intensive, chemical processes.
Yeah, I'll just add that we do have a preservation department here in the library, though. So they do more routine kind of procedures, like repairing the book bindings or, putting things into Mylar sleeves so that you're able to like handle them more frequently. So we do have those resources available, but it's a small department. So,
Yeah, it kind of goes back to when we were talking about the difference between when you're looking at that museum versus the archives, right? A museum is usually going to have a much more well-equipped, well-staffed, well-funded conservation lab, whereas most universities don't have that. Some do, but a lot of them don't.
And having seen it myself, it is a very impressive collection of pulps. The Eaton is also building collections of both LGBTQ plus and BIPOC science fiction. What are the goals and focuses of this aspect of the collection?
Yeah, to me that's really exciting because that's actually been my kind of connection or introduction to sci-fi was through these later waves, that I've been more open to kind of diverse perspectives and diverse authors. So for us, there's kind of two forces at play here. One, it's that we're seeing some new trends in academic research. So there's more interest in researching like Black speculative fiction, Afrofuturism, Indigenous futurisms, all these other branches of sci-fi um, that are kind of just becoming more visible and recognizable. And then the other force at play here is that our own field is also moving towards diversity. So in the archives and library world, they're talking a lot more about what we call silences in the archive, gaps in the archive. So, all these years, the Eaton has become a really robust collection, but all the authors are primarily white. They're all primarily male. So it's a very particular kind of perspective of science fiction. And so that's what we would consider kind of a gap is missing here of more diverse voices. So from both of these like angles, we're really motivated and encouraged to diversify the collections through intentional acquisitions, but also through outreach. So we try to do classes, we try to do workshops that highlight the diverse voices that we do have represented in the archives, or just kind of building on what other folks are doing and kind of just trying to share that research and hopefully inspire more folks to do that work.
And
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Nope.
I wonder how much of the focus is on contemporary work and how much of the focus is on work from the past.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we don't really have like a mandate or a quota that we're trying to reach either way. So I think it depends more on just how complementary would it be to our current holdings. So we always try to get material that will speak to the other items that we have in the collection. So it's kind of like a give and take, finding that balancing act. I don't know, Andrew, if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it also there's two other sort of tensions at play here. One is like if you're looking backwards, a lot of people who were involved, their papers might already be somewhere, right? Like it'd be great to have Octavia Butler's papers. Too bad they're at the Huntington, right? It'd be great to have Chip Delaney's papers. Too bad they're at Yale, right? So when you start thinking about trying to find that, to fill those historical gaps with people who were present and working at the time, you have to figure out, who of those people is still around, who still kept something that they can actually donate, right? So there's always that kind of question. And then the looking forward question, we're kind of in the now, we're sort of stuck in between in a way, because there's this big movement now and a lot of people doing this work now. Those people aren't going to be ready to donate archival collections for 20, 30, 40 years, right? Until their career is winding down or over, or even if they've passed away. So yeah, there's this kind of odd position where you're stuck in the middle sometimes in terms of, especially if you're thinking about like we'd love to diversify the author's papers, right? But there are only so many people out there, in a large part because of the way the industry worked and because of, the industry was overwhelmingly white and male for so long. There are only so many of those other people, and a lot of those other people that the names those collections are already at other institutions, right? So there's I don't know, I'm sort of speaking off the cuff a little bit, but there's a little bit of tension there trying to figure out. It's a balancing act that archives have to do, sort of working with what's available, what's extant from the past, and what's coming down the pipeline in the future.
And a lot of the times people don't think about archives, they don't think about their work ever being documented or preserved in the future. So they might not save a lot of things, or they just might not know what to kind of, to think about. So it's kind of educating people about it, and just also just making it part of the process.
For our writers in the audience, make note of that, please. That leads us beautifully into my next question. As librarians, how do you go about anticipating the needs of future researchers and going about deciding what is relevant in today's science fiction?
Yeah, it's really hard. I'll be honest, it's really, really hard. Right? Like, I think of it sort of, people who were, in the late 60s and the early 70s, when the new wave was hitting its stride, like maybe even before it was called the new wave, did people think that that was a notable thing that was worth paying attention to yet, right? There's always that question of you don't know until later what the big thing was, so it's always kind of tricky. We're always trying to anticipate that. We do have the benefit of the SFCS program and the faculty that are involved with that. There are people that we see the work that they do, the events that they put on, the speakers that they bring. So we can see the kind of work that's being done, both amongst the faculty, and then we can see the work that the grad students are doing. So that certainly gives us a little bit of insight into where research trends are going. But as I mentioned before, that stuff changes constantly too. It's sometimes that stuff, you're 2 years into thinking you're pursuing this brand new framework that's really awesome and it's going to be the future, and then in year 3 or 4 there's a whole new framework that comes that just wipes everything else aside, and that becomes what everybody's focused on. So yeah, it's certainly a real struggle. But yeah, and then, like I was just saying, we're always kind of a little behind the 8 ball, just because we're waiting for people to progress far enough into their life that they're ready and willing and interested in donating a collection. So in a lot of ways, you're always sort of looking at the past to a certain extent. But that's specifically when you're looking at archival or manuscript donations. If you're looking at the publication realm, then that's something we can, we're actively out there. We're always trying to buy up, representative examples of what's in the field these days. So yeah, but it's a struggle. It's not a struggle, it's a challenge for sure.
In a way, it's an almost identical challenge that science fiction authors have in extrapolating what the future might look like. So it's actually kind of fitting.
Sure. Yeah.
Beyond books, the collection also contains art, films, toys, awards, and so much more. How are these aspects of the collection utilized by students and researchers?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one. I've said this a couple times at this point now, but right, it's that question of the archives versus the museums kind of thing. But so in a lot of times there's more, and the way I've seen people interact with this material is that there's a lot of times more exhibition value than research value to a lot of that more physical objects, textual, or not textual, but material culture type stuff. But this goes back to the previous question, I still hold that at some point in the future, somebody is going to be interested in mid and late 20th century Western capitalist material culture, and they're going to want to come and look at some of that stuff, action figures or trading card games or what have you, right? Convention swag. Somebody's going to want to come look at that kind of stuff. So we have that, and it's here waiting for those people. Those people just aren't around yet. Maybe it'll take 100 years. I don't know. But that's sort of, a lot of times that's the game you're playing in the archives, is not what is going to be, what do people need now, but sometimes it's what is going to be useful 100 years ago when people are trying to understand how science fiction authors functioned in the 1950s, right? So that's one thought. Another one, we did have a class, a graduate student taught a class a couple of years ago in the media studies department. And he came to us because when he was an undergrad, I think he'd come and had like a tour of special collections or something as part of one of his classes. And he remembered us, and he came back and wanted to have his students, interact with some of that materiality. So, we pulled out a few of those types of objects as part of that media studies course that he was teaching. So it gets used a little bit here and there sometimes, but there's certainly a lot more of it than people are currently using, for sure.
And I've been looking so much forward to this aspect of the event tonight. For the two of you, what are some of your favorite items in the collection? I mean, it's an easy place to get lost into because there's so many neat objects and manuscripts, but personally, what are a few of your favorites?
Yeah, well, so we have, we have a few things that we pulled that we can share with folks. And I did see Gabriel had asked a really interesting version of this question. A single item in the library that never loses its value to you personally, an item you're particularly amazed you have in the library's custody. And I will go ahead and start off with that while Sandy prepares the other thing that we have, so we can show some of the stuff to you guys. But we have a really small collection of correspondence from somebody who was involved in a pen pal program, an East-West pen pal program at the end of the Cold War, as the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed. This woman's name is Catherine Clark. She's donated quite a bit of stuff to us, but she got into a pen pal program and got matched up with a science fiction fan in Russia. And there's about 3 years worth of correspondence from this guy in Russia, Igor Tolokonikov. And it's just amazing. It's really fascinating stuff. And it gives you a really human snapshot sort of behind the Iron Curtain as the curtain was coming down, if we want to be poetic about it. But there's just really interesting stuff. He was a science fiction fan. He talks about trying to put on a convention in Volga, and some of the planning around that. There's information, he talks about rationing and bread lines and just what it was. There's little snippets and snapshots of daily life in Russia at that time. And there's a really awesome letter from him that talks about him being in Moscow the day that the coup happened in 1991. He was there doing some planning for the convention that he was putting on. And, he was in Moscow. He was on a riverboat. That's just where they were. And they had a little handheld radio, and they were listening to the state broadcast of what was going on. And yeah, it's just really fascinating. And it just touches on some of my graduate work and where I was. There was a really big Cold War studies department where I did my master's. So that just, I don't know, it really sparked some interest in me. And that collection is actually digitized. So you can actually go look and find that letter if you want to. That's the Catherine Clark, C-L-A-R-K. And that's on the Catherine Clark papers, and that is on Calisphere if you want to go look it up. So that's just one little tidbit from me. And I think, are we good to go, Sandy? We're ready? Okay. Okay, I can start if you want. I'm going to turn my video off here because I'm going to stand up. But we're going to share screen, and you should be able to see some fun stuff here real quick. Okay, so I pulled some correspondence and things like that from a couple of our collections. And Sandy has a few interesting books and comics to share. So this one here, this is the Dear Phil in this letter is Philip Dick. And this is a letter from Ursula Le Guin. And this was from a really small collection that we purchased recently. Well, not recently, I think, I can't remember exactly when. It was during the pandemic closure, so I don't remember exactly when it happened. Everything, that was just one period of time. Everything was either before or after. But anyway, so this is a really fun letter. I like this because I think, so up here at the top, he clearly sent her something. And I think what she's talking about in this letter is either a draft, or maybe it was shortly after the publication of Flow My Tears by Philip Dick. And so that was a really fun just to stumble on this, and the way that she talks about whatever it is. I'm making an assumption here that it was that specific novel, but the timing works out. So this is September 74. And I believe that book was published in the spring of 74. So it would make sense if that was the case. But then she was going to be going to London, and she mentions wanting to, it'd be nice if they could go together. But I love the way that she ends this with the just, you're nuts. I wish I was nuts like you. Love, Ursula, which I think is just spectacular. Clearly she saw the craziness that was Philip K. Dick, but she saw it with some care and love, which was great too. So that's a really fun one. And if there is a question, I can't actually see you, Jean-Paul. So if there is a question, go ahead and jump in.
I'll let you know if anyone has any.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so here is another handwritten letter. Well, this is a draft, I should say. So this is from the Gardner-Dozois papers, and I was just poking through this actually, Jean-Paul, after your visit. It spurred me, something in our conversation spurred me to sort of poke around in Dozois' papers a little bit more, because I know that there's really cool stuff in here. And yeah, I opened the first box I opened, the first box of correspondence I opened, I found, it was just a treasure trove. There was all sorts of wonderful stuff. But this, so Dozois had been sending some manuscripts around to people. And there was a lot of correspondence with Damon Knight, and Knight was sort of encouraging him, yeah, keep sending it, send it to this guy, send it to this person, send it to this person. And eventually one of the last people he sent it to was Harlan Ellison. And there were like 3 or 4 handwritten drafts of the letter that Dozois wrote to send with the manuscript to Harlan Ellison, which I just thought was hilarious. And then there is a response letter from Ellison. It's probably, so this isn't dated. None of the drafts were dated, but I think they're 1969. And because the letter from Ellison in response is like summer 1970, and he's like, basically it's an entire page of a letter basically saying, sorry, I haven't read your manuscript, don't be mad at me. And then it's a whole bunch of excuses as to why, and a whole bunch of flowery language as to, it was really, really quite funny. But so yeah, I think it had been like 9 months or maybe even a year that Ellison had this manuscript. And when he wrote the letter saying he hadn't read the manuscript, he said he still hadn't read it and wasn't going to get to read it anytime soon. So, and I think that might have been for Dangerous Visions 2. It was either the first or the second Dangerous Visions anthology. I can't remember which one, but that was a really, really good find. And that kind of stuff, those sort of rejection letters are always great to have for students or young authors. It's always good to see that kind of stuff, just to see even people who had success. Nobody had success off the bat, right? So this one here, I think we've got it here. So this is a letter from Robert Silverberg. And this is a little bit more positive. This is on an up note. So I'm just going to read the first line here. You may be the lousiest speller this side of the Rockies, but you are one hell of a writer and you have a sale, man. So this is one of those good letters that you get, right, when you sell one of your stories. I thought this was just a really fun a fun letter to find. I'm a big fan of Robert Silverberg's work. I really like his novels, so that was really cool to see. There was, previous to this, there was a rejection letter from Silverberg as well, so he got all of it from Silverberg. All right, and I'm going to end with one more little fun thing that's a bit of a crowd pleaser here. Star Trek is always a crowd pleaser, right? So we have a number of show Bibles or writer's guides, however you want to call them. We have one for the original series. We have one for Voyager, one for Deep Space Nine. I don't think we have TNG, but those are the ones that I found so far. But this is the only technical manual that I have found, which is a little bit different, right? The writer's guides give you all of the information on like the background of the characters, the background of the setting, and all that kind of thing. The technical manual gives you all of the techno babble of Star Trek, right? And there's some really, really wonderful stuff in here. So you get like descriptions of all the various different craft and equipment. They define terminology. You get maps and stuff, right? Because not every writer necessarily knows all of the technobabble of Star Trek when they come into it, right? So these little guides are really cool. But the one thing that I was the happiest to find, I'm just going to page through here, try and find it for you real quick. And I believe I showed this to you, Jean-Paul, when you came here. There it is. This is awesome. And it's something that I had always wondered about as a Star Trek fan, but never like took the time to like do the math and figure it out. But like how all the warp factors really work, and like what different warp factors mean. And I was like, I know it's not an exponential scale. Is it a logarithmic scale? Like just trying to figure out like, what does it mean if you're at warp 9 versus 9.2? Like what does that really mean in practical terms? And so when I stumbled on this page of this manual, it was perfect. It was the thing from this book that was meant for me, basically. So yeah, I just wanted to share that just because it's a real fun little piece, a little nugget from this.
All right. So I'll go ahead and just pull some items as well to show. Let's see if I can move this over a little bit. So for mine, I wanted to pick something that was a little bit different from what Andrew had pulled. So here's an example of one of the comic books that we have. It's Tribal Force, which I'll just flip through a few pages so you can get a view of it. But what makes this comic book significant is that it's actually the first one that portrayed a group of all Native American heroes, superheroes specifically. So it's a Native made comic, and we were able to get it through a Native owned comic book store. So those are all kind of ways that we're trying to support more diversity in the collections and, just supporting communities and being able to have materials from their own voices. And pretty similar to that is another book here of an anthology of speculative fiction called Love After the End. So this is a really great LGBTQ plus short story collection, also from Indigenous or indigiqueer, as it says on the cover page here, authors. So I highly recommend checking this one out if you haven't before. Oh, thank you. And just to give you an example,
Sandy, would you mind elaborating real quick on the cover? It also said Two Spirit. Would you mind filling us in on that?
Sure. Two Spirit is a phrase that we hear a lot in the Indigenous community because it's kind of like a more culturally sensitive way to say LGBTQ plus. So I can't speak fully authoritatively on it since I'm not part of a particular community that uses that phrase, but my understanding of it is that the two spirits represent both masculine and feminine. So it implies that a person has both kinds of energies or both kinds of representations. So is just another way to express a queer identity in a uniquely Native way. Awesome. And yeah, feel free to let me know, John Paul, if there's any other questions. So this next one is a manuscript from Jamie Go. And Andrew mentioned her earlier. She's an alumna from UCR and also a participant in the Clarion workshops. And this is an example of one of her manuscripts. And you actually see the same manuscript after touch in different iterations. So different cohort members, giving their notes. This one said they didn't like the title, they gave an alternative title, but you can kind of see some of the different edits that were made. And I didn't pull the final version of this, but you can like look it up online, and it's pretty great because you actually get to see which edits ultimately she accepted as permanent edits. So it's an example of how you can use these manuscripts in your own research just to see the different iterations of the piece. Thank you. Thank you. Andrew's an awesome assistant for this process. And so these last three items that I want to share with you are kind of all about Black speculative fiction. So we probably all know Octavia Butler. This is one item that I'm particularly, excited about because it's not only a copy of her famous novel Kindred, but it's also a signed copy. So it's really special, these moments that you kind of like pull an item from the shelf and maybe or maybe you don't know. It's extra exciting when you don't know, but you get that little chill when you can kind of like hold it in your hand and have this signed copy from, such a iconic figure in sci-fi. Yeah. And so this one here is a example of a storyboard, and this is from the John Jennings collection from his archive. And so here we see kind of like an early representation of what would become the graphic novel adaptation of Kindred. So I kind of pulled for you the preliminary drawing so you can get an idea of what the sketch looks like, and then when you see the final piece in comparison, it's pretty awesome to be able to see the differences. So if you recall, the expression on this figure is actually very different in the final iteration versus in this first one. So it's those subtle differences, that it's pretty great to be able to see, especially if you're a fan of how the creator might have interpreted things differently over time. But yeah, so those are some examples of some of my favorite items here in the collections.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing those. It's amazing to think that barely scratches the surface. It's amazing to think it barely scratches the surface of the treasure that is contained within the Eaton.
Sorry, John Paul, I can't hear you. I don't know if Andrew can hear you.
Did I cut out there?
No, you're okay. I think maybe it's the other computer we have in this room. But
well, thank you both for sharing just a sliver of the treasure there. Amazing materials. And just a few more questions for you before we wrap it up. If someone from the public wants to donate materials or funds to the Eaton, how does one go about it?
Yeah, so if somebody wanted to donate funds, that would start with Cherry Williams, who's the head of the director of Distinctive Collections. She's the one who runs the department. And her email is on the Special Collections University Archives website. So that would be the route to start there. Donating materials, yeah, you just reach out to us, whether Sandy or myself or Cherry, or just our special collections, our general special collections email, which I believe is specialcollections@ucr.edu. Sandy is putting it in right now. So yeah, it's just, reach out and we start having those conversations like I described earlier.
Well, I can't thank you both enough, both for this event and for the amazing tour that you gave me a few weeks ago. Thank you to our audience for all of the wonderful information and questions that were posted in the chat. I can't wait to print those up and reread it there. So really thank you all for a lively discussion. If you're in California, make sure to go visit the Eaton. If not, check out the website. I posted the link in the chat again, and utilize this amazing resource and research material and amazingly friendly staff as well. Before we go, I just wanted to give both of you the opportunity for any parting statements, and thank you so much for sharing all this material with us.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was a real pleasure. We're happy to be here, and yeah, we're certainly here. And like you said, we're friendly and available. So I encourage folks to swing by, or if you're not in Southern California, if you're by another institution, check them out too. Everybody's got great stuff.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what everyone else has already said. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share the materials with you, share a little bit about the collections here and the work that we're doing. And yeah, this is the best part of the job, is just being able to spread the word about the collection. So hopefully we'll hear from you, or you'll check out other collections closer to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sandy Enriquez, Andrew Lippert from the Eaton collection at UCR. Have a wonderful night, everybody.